In the year 990 AD, Europe was a chaotic patchwork of overlapping jurisdictions, rival warlords, and fragmented fiefdoms grinding against each other for territory. The centralized government and rigid borders we recognize today emerged as an accidental byproduct of a centuries-long arms race. To analyze this evolution, we use the framework established by Charles Tilly in his text Coercion, Capital, and European States. Tilly maps the survival of any ruler on a graph driven by two essential resources. On the x-axis, capital, the commercial wealth required to fund campaigns. On the y-axis, coercion, the armed men necessary to execute them. The way a state organized its government was the result of how its rulers acquired these two variables. Tilly highlights the Ottoman experience as a crucial comparative lens. Examining the Turkish context reveals how these pressures operated across different geographies. The first chapter establishes the primary motivation. To survive, rulers had to wage war. To wage war, they had to extract resources from their territory. Capital represents the presence of cities, merchant classes, and trade networks. Coercion represents the presence of powerful landlords, private armies, and the force required to take tribute. These resources were distributed unevenly across the continent. Some regions controlled maritime trade routes but lacked manpower. Others possessed massive peasant populations but no commercial infrastructure. The geographical availability of these two resources set the rules for the evolutionary game to come. Regions with high capital but low coercion, specifically Venice and the Dutch Republic, show a distinct pattern. These capital-dense areas formed capital-intensive states. Because they relied on taxing commercial wealth to buy mercenary armies, they were ruled primarily by merchant oligarchies. In contrast, regions with high coercion but very little capital, like Russia and Brandenburg, moved in the opposite direction. These areas formed coercion-intensive states. Without a wealthy merchant class to tax, rulers built heavy-handed empires, using raw force to extract labor and grain from the peasantry. A state's internal organization was a direct reflection of whether it taxed merchants or squeezed peasants for tribute. To consolidate control, rulers executed what Tilly terms the bifurcation of violence. They systematically disarmed local lords and nobles to ensure the central state held a monopoly on armed force. Maintaining this monopoly was expensive. Rulers quickly exhausted the income from their personal estates. They pivoted to national taxation and the management of immense national debts to pay for standing armies. The administrative machinery of the state, the treasuries, the courts, and the tax collectors, rapidly grew to manage this massive extraction. This created a cycle. Higher taxes funded larger armies, which required larger bureaucracies to extract even more taxes. The modern state apparatus is a byproduct of a ruler's desperate need to fund war. As armies grew from tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands, states were forced to transition from indirect rule through local lords to direct rule, where the state interacted with individual subjects. The French Revolution accelerated this transition. The demand for mass conscription pushed resource extraction to its physical limit. Populations resisted these demands for their money and their lives through riots and rebellions. To maintain their armies, rulers were forced to bargain with their own citizens. This bargaining process forced the crown to concede. In exchange for taxation and conscriptions, rulers granted representation and institutionalized parliaments. This is the central paradox of Tilly's fourth chapter. Militarization is what forced the creation of civilian bureaucracies and democratic institutions. Citizens' rights were the price rulers paid for military survival. On the matrix, a middle path emerged, capitalized coercion, exemplified by Britain and France. This hybrid model outcompeted the extremes. These states had the capital to buy advanced weapons and the coercive power to field massive, loyal citizen armies. These states operated in a highly competitive European network where survival depended on matching the neighbor's military capacity. Peace treaties and alliances codified the rules of this system, forcing all members to adapt to this specific model. Any state that failed to adopt the centralized model, whether it was a loose federation or a city-state, was absorbed or destroyed by its neighbors. The borders of Europe today are the result of this victorious blueprint for organizing violence. Tilly's model offers a specific explanation for modern instability in the developing world. Many modern states acquired military power through external funding and imported weapons from superpowers, rather than through internal taxation. Bypassing internal extraction meant these rulers never had to engage in the bargaining process with their own populations. Without that leverage, the civilianization paradox failed. The military apparatus expanded with external wealth, remaining unchecked by civilian institutions. Skipping the historical extraction and bargaining cycle explains the high frequency of military dictatorships and coups in these regions. Democratic elections and civilian rule are not default states. There is a difference between a state forced to negotiate its existence with its taxpayers and one that can sustain its military through external support. A state's current stability is the residue of how its rulers historically solved the problem of acquiring the means of war. To understand the stability or the collapse of any nation today, you have to follow the historical flow of its coercion and capital.